The train station at Dustwell hadn't seen a fresh coat of paint in 10 years, but every afternoon, as the sun slid down the canyon shoulder and spilled gold across the tracks, Clara Merriweather stood beneath its wooden awning like clockwork. The hem of her black dress gathered dust in the wind, and her gloved hands rested at her waist, calm, composed, patient in a way that unnerved the townsfolk. "She's still at it," muttered old Bishop, the telegraph operator, wiping sweat from his neck with a crumpled rag. 2 years now. That's longer than most wives mourn. "She wasn't his wife," answered the station clerk, squinting out the window. "Just engaged. He went off with the sheriff's man and didn't come back. Ain't the same." Clara didn't hear them, or if she did, she gave no sign. Her eyes stayed on the tracks stretching out into the empty desert, watching the heat shimmer like ghosts rising from the earth. 2 years ago, Thomas Granger had kissed her goodbye in that very spot. He was riding with Sheriff Ellison's posse to chase down raiders who'd jump a mail coach and left 3 men dead near Elkhorn Ridge. He wore his old cavalry jacket then, torn at the cuffs, the left shoulder patched with a darker shade of brown, and smiled like he was off to fix something simple. A fence, a gate, a broken wheel. They never found his body. Just the jacket, torn and bloodstained, stuffed into the saddlebag of a horse that staggered back into town days later without its rider. Sheriff Ellison said the tracks led into canyon country where no one sane dared follow. He died a good man, they told her, fighting wrong with right. But Clara had not wept, not publicly, not once. She cleaned the jacket, folded it gently into a cedar box, and began waiting. Every day, every train. It became routine, like church or supper or the steady tick of the old grandfather clock at the general store. People pitied her at first. Then they grew uncomfortable. Eventually, they avoided eye contact altogether. She didn't seem mad exactly, just fixed, like a nail driven into a stubborn piece of wood. That day, the heat clung thick to the sky, and the breeze came from the west, heavy with the scent of iron and ash. Dustwell was quieter than usual. A hawk circled overhead. Bishop tapped at the keys of his telegraph machine with a rhythm that didn't match his usual lazy pace. He glanced toward Clara, then stood and stepped out onto the platform. "Train coming in from El Paso," he said. "Didn't know we were expecting one from that way." Clara didn't turn. She knew his voice well enough to understand the words. "El Paso line's been quiet since the spring floods," he added, trying again. She nodded, just once, eyes still on the tracks. The train came in slower than most, its iron belly groaning with heat and wear. It wasn't one of the newer Pacific models, but an older engine, scabbed with rust and soot. It huffed to a stop like a dying man drawing his last breath. 7 passengers stepped off. A preacher, 2 women with travel-worn parasols, a merchant in city clothes, a young man carrying a rifle, and a child clinging to her mother's skirts. Clara's eyes moved over each face, quiet and exacting, as if ticking off a list. Then came the 8th. He moved with a limp, left leg stiff from some injury long healed wrong. Dust clung to his boots, and his hat was pulled low over his brow. But it was the jacket that stopped her breath. Brown leather, worn thin at the elbows. The left shoulder bore a patch, a darker shade of brown. Clara's hand tightened around the edge of her satchel. The man didn't look at her. He stepped onto the platform, nodded to the station clerk, and began walking toward the road into town. His movements were careful, deliberate. He carried no bag, no weapon in sight, just the weight of long miles behind him. She stepped forward. "Excuse me," she said. He paused. "That jacket," she said. "Where did you get it?" He turned slowly, meeting her eyes for the first time. They were not Thomas's eyes. These were darker, older, like river stones worn smooth by time. A long scar curved beneath his left cheekbone, partially hidden by stubble. "Found it," he said. His voice was low, steady. "Near Dry Rock. Man who wore it bled out in the sand. I took it before the coyotes did." Clara didn't blink. What was his name? He looked at her a long moment. Didn't say. A gust of wind stirred the dust between them. The platform creaked. She nodded, stepping aside. The man walked on. Later, as the townsfolk discussed the train and the surprise of it all, Clara sat in the quiet of her parlor, the windows cracked just enough to let in the dusk. She laid out her revolver on the table, a Colt pocket model, engraved with initials no one but her ever noticed. She hadn't believed Thomas was alive. Not really. But she'd needed to see. She'd needed to know. Now she did. The man who wore his jacket had the look of someone still hunting something. Or someone. And Clara Merriweather, the widow who wasn't a widow, would see where that path led. She'd waited long enough. The stranger took up work at the livery within 2 days of arriving. He didn't ask for much, just a place to sleep and 3 square meals a week. Jed Crane, who ran the stables, eyed him with suspicion, but work was scarce, and hands willing to shovel manure without complaint were rarer still. Clara watched from a distance. She never approached, never spoke again of the jacket, but she noted how he moved, slow but deliberate, favoring the left leg, how he quieted skittish horses with nothing but a murmured word, how he avoided crowds, slipping out of the saloon before the poker games got rowdy, nursing a single drink that barely touched his lips. He gave no name. When asked, he simply shrugged. Some folks began calling him El Paso, assuming that's where he'd come from. Others said he was a deserter from the war, hiding from old enemies. But rumors in Dustwell were like tumbleweeds, plentiful, dry, and mostly hollow. Clara wasn't interested in gossip. She was watching for something else. On the 3rd Sunday, as the town gathered at the chapel for Reverend Harlan's sermon, the stranger remained outside, leaning against a hitched post, head lowered, arms folded. Clara stepped out after the closing hymn and found him still there, eyes fixed on the horizon. "You don't pray?" she asked. He didn't look at her. "I did. Long time ago." The breeze stirred her skirts, carried the scent of dry mesquite. She studied him, his unshaven face, the craggy lines beneath his eyes, the way he wore that jacket-like armor. "Thomas wore that coat," she said. He nodded slightly. "You told me." "I don't believe he died easy." "No," he said. "He didn't." That froze her. "You knew him." He hesitated. Then, not well. Just long enough to owe him. He pushed off the post and started walking away, but not before she caught something in his expression, a flicker of guilt, or grief, or both. She followed him once, just after sunset. He left the livery with no lantern, no horse, just his shadow stretching long behind him. He walked past the main road and through the dry gulch west of town, all the way to the old telegraph lines, where nothing had run in years. There, beneath a half-dead cottonwood, he stopped. Clara kept her distance. The stranger reached into his coat and pulled something out, a torn scrap of paper. He stared at it for a long while, then tucked it away and began talking, not loud enough to hear, but with the rhythm of a man confessing something to someone long gone. She didn't ask him about it the next day. She didn't have to. Whatever trail he was on, it hadn't ended with the jacket. A week later, Dustwell got news of a caravan gone missing 30 miles east, near the edge of the old mining fields. A merchant, his guards, 2 wagons, all vanished. No sign of wheels, no blood, just silence. Folks muttered about the vultures again. They were a name folks feared but hadn't spoken in a while. Outlaws who moved through desert storms like phantoms, ambushed travelers, robbed ranches, then melted into the canyon maze, where no posse followed. A decade ago, Sheriff Ellison had chased them once and come back with 2 men missing and his left ear torn off. Since then, Dustwell kept its head low. Clara was dusting the shelves at her father's old store when she heard Bishop cussing in the back room. She stepped in to find the stranger leaning over the telegraph machine, rolling a spent shell casing between his fingers. "Another one gone?" she asked. He didn't answer, but his jaw tightened. "What do you know about the vultures?" she pressed. He looked at her then. "Enough." That evening, he showed up outside her porch. The sun had already dipped, and the stars blinked like cautious witnesses overhead. "You want to know what happened to your fiancée?" he asked. "You best hear the truth." She opened the door without a word. Inside, he didn't sit. He stood in the parlor like a man delivering a sermon at a funeral. "I was tracking a bounty. Reddick Holt, former soldier turned killer. He joined up with the vultures after the war ended. Slippery as smoke. The law sent word, I picked up the trail. Out near Elkhorn Ridge, I ran into a posse chasing the same man. Thomas was with them. Clara folded her hands, the revolver still laid out on the table beside her. He knew the land, knew how to read sign. We trailed whole to a box canyon. Ambush. Vultures came down from the ridge like wolves. Half the posse died in minutes. Thomas pulled me from under a fallen horse, shoved me into cover, then took 2 bullets to the chest, buying me time to run. "Why didn't you bring him home?" she asked, voice low. "I buried him," he said, "or thought I did. But when I went back 2 days later, his body was gone." Silence filled the room like smoke. "I kept the jacket," he said. "Didn't want scavengers getting it. Figured I'd finish what he started." "And what is that?" He looked her dead in the eyes. "Killing Reddick Holt." She stood, slow and steady. "Then take me with you." "No. I can shoot." "No. I'm not asking." His mouth tightened, but he didn't speak. "I've waited 2 years," she said. "For truth, for peace, for a grave to cry over. If you're riding to find the man who took Thomas from me, then I'm going with you." At last, he nodded once. A slow, solemn gesture. "We leave before sunrise." She didn't sleep that night. She packed only what she needed. A spare shirt, ammunition, a photo of Thomas, taken on a picnic beneath the sycamore tree before war and blood and legends. And as dawn broke across the sky, washing Dustwell in pale gold, Clara Merriweather rode out beside the stranger in her dead fiancé's jacket, toward the place where ghosts were made and men were broken. She didn't know his name. Not yet. The desert offered no welcome. Wind hissed through dry arroyos, tugging at the edges of Clara's coat, stinging her cheeks with dust. The sun hung low, bleeding orange across the land like a wound that never healed. She rode in silence, the stranger beside her, both mounted on hardy mustangs borrowed from Jed Crane. Neither spoke of where they were going, only how far they had left. Clara had never left the edges of Dustwell. Now, each mile peeled back something inside her. Fear, hope, grief that had grown into a dull, bone-deep ache. The stranger, whom she still knew only as El Paso, rode like a man bred in the saddle. He kept his eyes low and his hand near the worn grip of his revolver. She'd seen him clean it the night before. Every piece laid out with ritual precision, each bullet loaded like it carried a name. By the second evening, they reached the high flats above the canyons. The trail turned colder than wind on tombstone marble. Yet El Paso dismounted, squatted low, and ran his fingers through the red grit. "4 riders," he muttered. "Boot prints staggered, one's wounded." Clara peered at the ground. It looked like nothing to her. "How can you tell?" He traced a faint line with the edge of his knife. "Blood, mixed in the sand." "Yours?" "No. Too fresh." They made camp beneath a cluster of boulders, shaped like cracked skulls. Clara roasted beans and jerky over the fire, while El Paso sat sharpening a knife that looked like it had taken lives before. She finally broke the silence. "How long you been chasing him?" "Too long." "What'd he do to you?" "He lived," he said flatly, "when better men didn't." Clara stared into the fire. "You said Thomas saved you, that you owed him." "I did. But there's more." El Paso looked at her, then away. "I was supposed to lead that mission. I passed the job to Thomas. Said I had a fever. He took it without question." Her breath caught. "When the ambush happened, he kept us alive. And I wasn't there." He said nothing more that night. Neither did she. At dawn, they rode toward the Forked Hills, where ravens circled in the sky like omens. El Paso led with the certainty of a man who'd memorized the land through loss. Around midday, they found the remains of a wagon, sun-bleached wood, a shattered wheel, dried blood painted across the sand like rusted ink. Clara's stomach twisted. "The merchant." "Elkhorn convoy," El Paso confirmed. He knelt again, studying the drag marks leading into the ravine. "Survivors?" she asked. "No bodies means hostages," he replied grimly. "Or bait." The canyon loomed ahead, cracked and steep. Shadows moved in its depths, some belonging to rocks, some, she feared, not. They left the horses behind and moved on foot. Clara gripped her revolver tight. her palms damp despite the dry air. The weight of it felt heavier than it had in Dustwell. Real now. They found the sentry just before dusk, a young man no older than 20, slouched against the canyon wall, chewing a sprig of sage. El Paso motioned for silence, then crept up behind him and knocked him out cold with the butt of his revolver. "Tie him," he said. Clara's hand shook as she wrapped the rope, but her knots held. They moved forward slowly, every footstep deliberate. The canyon's bend opened to a hollowed-out basin where a fire crackled, and 4 men lounged around it. A 5th figure, taller, broader, stood near the edge, looking out at the gulch like a king surveying a cursed kingdom. Clara's breath hitched. The man wore a coat lined with rabbit fur, the color of old ash. A long rifle hung from his back. His face was weathered, cruelly carved. His eyes cold, calculating. "Reddick Holt," El Paso whispered. Clara nodded. "You sure?" "Too sure." 3 bodies were tied near the fire, 2 men and a woman, all gagged. One guard nudged them now and then with his boot, grinning like he'd found something funnier than a bad joke. El Paso turned to Clara. "You go around the ridge. When you hear a shot, come down from the left. Don't shoot unless you have to." She grabbed his sleeve. "And if you're the one shot, then run." He didn't wait for argument. Like a shadow, he slipped along the canyon wall. Clara crept the other way, staying low, her heart punching against her ribs like it wanted out. She reached the ridge in time to see El Paso step into the firelight, his revolver raised. "Reddick," he barked. The outlaw turned, calm as sin. "Well, I'll be damned," he said with a slow smile. "You're late." Clara watched from above, breath frozen in her throat. The outlaws reached for guns, but Holt raised a hand. "Let him speak. I want to hear what lie he's come up with now." "No lie," El Paso said. "I came to collect on a debt." Reddick chuckled. "From me? I paid my dues in blood. You still owe." Then the shot rang out, not from El Paso, but from Holt. El Paso ducked, rolled, fired twice. One outlaw dropped screaming. Chaos erupted. Clara moved. She scrambled down the ridge, firing once at a man charging El Paso. Her bullet clipped his shoulder. He staggered. El Paso finished him. The woman by the fire wriggled free of her gag, screaming. Clara rushed to her, cutting the bindings with trembling hands. Gunfire echoed in the gulch. Smoke choked the air. Holt vanished behind the rocks. Clara turned to see El Paso give chase. She followed without thinking. They found Holt behind a boulder, blood trailing from his thigh. He fired blindly, but El Paso dodged and fired back. The bullet struck Holt's gut. He crumpled, coughing. El Paso stepped close, barrel aimed. "You left Thomas in the dirt," he said. Holt spat blood. He screamed. El Paso's hand trembled. Clara stepped forward, voice shaking. "Let me." El Paso looked at her. She took the gun, and she pulled the trigger. When the echo died, the wind carried only silence. Dust settled slow over the gulch like the earth, trying to forget what it had just witnessed. The sun had dipped beneath the canyon rim, leaving the basin in a bruised purple hush. Smoke from the dying fire coiled into the dusk, and the crack of Clara's gun still echoed in the canyon's bones. Reddick Holt's body lay in a slump, sprawled on the stone like a fallen beast. His rifle had skittered out of reach when the shot tore through his chest. His mouth hung half open, as if still trying to conjure the last threat he'd never get to speak. Clara stared at him. Her hand still clutched the revolver, the weight of it digging into her wrist. Her breath came ragged and hot, like she'd run 100 miles and hadn't stopped yet. El Paso stood beside her, silent. He didn't take the gun back. He didn't have to. "I didn't think I could do it," she said finally. "You could," he answered. "You just needed a reason." They moved together to untie the remaining captives, one merchant, a wounded ranch hand, and a weathered woman who looked old enough to remember the war but had eyes sharp as hawks. Clara cut the last rope and the woman grasped her hand. "You saved us." Clara gave a slight shake of her head. Not alone. By the time the stars blinked to life overhead, they had buried 2 of Holt's men in shallow rock-covered graves and bound the last surviving outlaw for the law in Elkhorn. The wind howled once through the canyon, cold as a grave's breath, then went still. They camped that night near the basin, too far from town to ride without risk. Clara sat on a bedroll, arms wrapped tight around her knees. She cleaned the revolver and reloaded it by the fire, the motion both foreign and familiar now. The others slept in scattered bundles nearby, exhausted. Only El Paso stayed awake, back turned, staring into the dark. "You ever feel it get lighter?" she asked quietly. "What?" "The guilt." He didn't answer right away. "No, but you learn to carry it without it breaking you." She nodded slowly. "That's something, I guess." He turned then, the firelight catching the side of his face. "You were never meant to wait at that station forever." Clara looked away. "I know." He rose and walked toward her, slow, like he knew she still held something fragile inside. When he sat down beside her, neither of them spoke for a long while. "When Thomas saved you, did he know what he was walking into?" she finally asked. "I think he did," El Paso replied, "but he walked it anyway." She traced a line in the dust with her finger. "Then I reckon he and I weren't so different after all." At dawn, they began the ride back. Dustwell greeted them in silence. People stared from porch steps and saloon windows as the pair rode in with a bound outlaw, two rescued souls, and eyes that had seen too much to ever fully speak of. Sheriff Crane met them at the jailhouse door. He took the prisoner, heard the story, and offered El Paso a nod that said more than a handshake ever could. Clara watched the man disappear into a cell. Her heart thudded, slow and steady, not just from justice done, but from what lay ahead. She stood on the boardwalk beside El Paso as the others dispersed. For a long time, neither moved. The morning train screamed in the distance, the tracks rattling like they were eager for something to return that never would. "You'll leave again," she said quietly. "I might. But not today." "No," he said. "Not today." They walked together to the depot. The platform was empty except for the wind and a few stray leaves tumbling across the wood. She paused where she'd always stood, right beside the third post from the telegraph office, the spot where Thomas never came home. She looked at El Paso. "You still haven't told me your real name." "I gave that up a long time ago." "Well," she said, "when you're ready to remember it, you know where I'll be." He smiled faintly, not wide, just enough to wrinkle the corners of his eyes. Then he reached into his coat, pulled out something wrapped in faded cloth. Clara took it with trembling hands, unfolding it slowly. It was a medal, Army issue, worn smooth but still legible. Thomas's name was engraved on the back. "I've carried it long enough," El Paso said. Clara closed her fingers around it. "Thank you." They stood in silence as the train pulled in, steam hissing across the rails. A few passengers disembarked, but none wore Thomas's jacket this time. She didn't need them to. He turned to go. "El Paso," she called. He looked back. You did right by him. For the first time, his shoulders relaxed. As he walked away down the street, coat fluttering behind him and spurs chiming faintly with each step, Clara turned toward the rising sun and took her first step off the platform. She never waited there again.